The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the quiet neighborhood, where the leaves of old oak trees rustled gently in the breeze. Margaret Maggie Thompson, a retired teacher in her late 70s, was enjoying her favorite pastime, rocking gently on her porch with a cup of tea in hand. Her home sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by a garden she had tended for decades. It was her little haven, tucked away from the hustle and bustle of the world. Life had grown quiet since her husband passed, and Maggie had come to appreciate the solitude. But today that calm was shattered in the most unexpected way. She first noticed the figure as a blur of movement at the edge of her property. Squinting through her glasses, she realized it was a child, a boy, no older than 7 or 8, trudging up her driveway. His clothes were disheveled, his face streaked with dirt, and in his small hands, he clutched a shoebox as if it were a treasure. Maggie's heart sank. The sight of a child in distress awoke the instincts that had made her a beloved teacher for so many years. She set her tea down and rose slowly, her knees protesting the movement. The boy hesitated at the base of the porch steps, glancing around nervously as though unsure if he should go any further. "Hello there, sweetheart," Maggie called softly, her voice gentle but firm. "Are you lost?" The boy's eyes darted up to meet hers, wide and fearful. He didn't say a word, but his grip on the shoebox tightened. Slowly, Maggie walked down the steps, careful not to alarm him. She noticed the boy's sneakers were muddy, as if he'd been walking for miles. His hair, a tangle of dark curls, stuck to his forehead, damp with sweat. "It's okay, you're safe here," Maggie reassured him, stopping a few feet away to give him space. "Do you need help? Are you hurt?" Still, the boy remained silent. But then, as if deciding she was someone he could trust, he stepped forward and extended the shoebox toward her. Maggie hesitated, her mind racing. Why was this boy alone? What could possibly be inside that box? "Is this for me?" she asked, crouching slightly to his level. The boy nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line. Carefully, she took the shoebox from his hands. It was worn, the cardboard soft and faded as if it had been carried around for days. The top was secured with a piece of frayed string, knotted tightly. She looked at the boy again, but he just stood there, watching her with those wide, unblinking eyes. There was something unsettling in his expression. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. Maggie untied the string and lifted the lid. At first, she didn't understand what she was looking at. Nestled inside, wrapped in what looked like an old dish towel, was a bundle or something small. And then the realization hit her like a thunderclap. Her breath caught, and she stumbled back a step. "Oh my! Oh no!" she whispered, her voice shaking. She glanced at the boy, her hands trembling. What? What is this?" The boy didn't answer. His gaze dropped to the ground, and for the first time, she noticed tears welling in his eyes. Maddie's heart pounded as she carefully set the box down and reached for her phone. Whatever was going on here, she knew one thing for certain. This was far beyond anything she could handle alone. Her fingers fumbled as she dialed, and when the operator picked up, Maddie's voice was barely steady. "This is Margaret Thompson," she began, her eyes darting between the boy and the shoebox. "I need to report something urgent." The operator's calm voice prompted her for more information, but Maddie hesitated, unsure how to even begin to explain. She glanced at the boy again. He was now sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands, his small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Please," Maddie finally managed, her voice breaking. "Just send someone quickly. I don't know what's going on, but there's a boy here, and he's brought something I think the police need to see." As she hung up the phone, a cold chill ran down her spine. Whatever this was, it was only the beginning. And something told her that life in her quiet little neighborhood would never be the same again. Maggie paced back and forth on the porch, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The operator had assured her help was on the way, but every passing minute felt like an eternity. The boy hadn't moved from the steps, his small frame hunched as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be all right, but the words felt hollow when she didn't know what everything was. Her eyes kept drifting to the shoebox, now sitting on the porch floor, its contents still hidden under the dish towel. The image of what she had seen flashed in her mind again, making her stomach churn. Maggie finally broke the silence. "Sweetheart, can you tell me your name?" she asked, her voice soft but coaxing. The boy didn't answer. His small hands rubbed at his eyes, wiping away the tears, but he still wouldn't look at her. Maggie knelt down beside him, careful to keep a bit of distance. "It's okay if you're scared. You're not in trouble. I just want to help." He sniffled, his voice so faint it was almost lost in the breeze. Ely, he murmured. Ely, Maggie repeated gently, smiling despite the tension knotting in her chest. That's a nice name. Do you live around here? Ely shook his head, his curls bouncing with emotion. He sniffed again, drawing in a shaky breath. I walked here, from my house, he said, his words slow and careful, as if he wasn't used to talking much. Maddie's brows furrowed. That must have been a long walk. Where are your parents, Ely? Do they know where you are? At the mention of his parents, Ely's face crumpled, and a fresh wave of tears spilled down his cheeks. Maddie's heart ached at the sight. She wanted to pull him into a hug, to shield him from whatever had driven him here, but she held back, letting him take his time. It's okay, honey, she said again, her tone steady. You can tell me when you're ready. The boy buried his face in his hands again, and Maddie sighed, glancing toward the street. Where were the police? The longer she waited, the more questions piled up in her mind. Who was this boy? Why had he come to her house of all places? And what was in that shoebox? She thought she knew the answer, but it was too horrifying to fully believe. As if sensing her thoughts, Ely suddenly spoke, his voice muffled by his hands. I didn't know what else to do. She told me to go somewhere safe. She said you'd help. Maggie blinked, startled. Who told you that, Ely? Your mom? He nodded, his shoulders trembling. She said to take the box and run. She said not to stop for anyone, just to find someone who could help. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture they formed only deepened Maggie's unease. She sat down beside Ely, careful not to startle him. Your mom was very smart to tell you that, she said, and you did a brave thing, coming all this way. But Ely, is your mom okay? Is she safe? Ely hesitated, his little hands clutching the fabric of his pants. Finally, he shook his head. She's hurt, he whispered, his voice cracking. She told me not to look back, but I heard her scream. Maddie's breath caught. Her worst fears were starting to feel all too real. She placed a hand on her chest, trying to steady the rapid thud of her heart. Whatever had happened to Ely's mother, it was clear the boy had been through something terrible. But Maggie knew she couldn't press him for more. Not yet. He was just a child, and he was already carrying so much. A faint sound broke the tension, a siren in the distance, growing louder by the second. Relief washed over Maggie. Help was finally here. She stood and waved toward the street as a patrol car came into view, its lights flashing red and blue. It pulled to a stop at the end of her driveway, and two officers stepped out, a man and a woman, both wearing calm but serious expressions. Maggie gestured for them to come closer. Thank goodness you're here, she said, her voice a mixture of relief and urgency. This boy, Ely, he showed up here with with a box. I think something terrible might happen to his mother. The officers exchanged a glance, their professional calm unwavering. The female officer, who introduced herself as Officer Harper, crouched down to Ely's level. Hi there, buddy, she said gently. My name's Harper. You're not in trouble, okay? We just want the help. Can you tell me what happened? Eli looked up at her, his big, tear-filled eyes searching her face. Slowly he pointed to the shoebox. It's in there, he said quietly. Harper's brow furrowed, but she nodded, reaching for the box. Maggie watched as the officer carefully lifted the lid, her expression changing in an instant. Her face tightened, a shadow of alarm flickering in her eyes. She quickly replaced the lid and stood up, signaling to her partner. Bryant, she said, her voice low but firm. We're going to need backup, and an ambulance. Maddie's stomach dropped. She didn't need to see inside the box again to know that whatever was in there was serious. Serious enough to send a seasoned officer into action mode. What is it? She asked, her voice trembling. Harper glanced at her, her professional demeanor slipping just enough to reveal a hint of the weight she was carrying. Ma'am, it's best if you stay back for now, she said. We're going to take care of this. Ely clung to Maddie's arm, his small hands trembling. Don't let them take it, he pleaded, his voice rising. It's all I have left. It's for her. Harper crashed back down, her tone soothing. Ely, I promise we'll take good care of it. But right now, we need to figure out how to help your mom. Can you tell me where she is? Eli hesitated, his gaze darting between Harper and Maggie. Finally, he pointed in the direction he had come from. She's at the house. The one with the broken fence. Harper nodded, standing up and motioning for her partner to radio the information in. As Bryant spoke into his radio, Maggie knelt down beside Eli, her hands resting gently on his shoulders. Ely, these people are here to help, she said softly. They're going to find your mom and make sure she's okay. Ely's lip quivered, but he nodded, his trust in Maggie evident. As Harper gently guided him toward the patrol car, Maddie stayed behind, her gaze fixed on the shoebox. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger story. One that would change everything she thought she knew about her quiet little world. The late afternoon air grew heavier as Maggie watched the patrol car pull away, Ely's small face pressed against the window. His expression haunted her, wide, frightened eyes that seemed far too knowing for a child his age. She stood on her porch for a long moment, the stillness of the neighborhood settling around her like an oppressive weight. The shoebox sat where the officers had left it, its lid secured once more. Even though she hadn't seen inside again, the memory of what it contained refused to leave her mind. Maggie rubbed her temples and stepped back into the house. Her tea, now cold, sat forgotten on the small side table. She picked it up absent-mindedly, her hands trembling as she carried it to the sink. Thoughts whirled in her mind. Ely's cryptic words, the officer's hurried actions, at the look of quiet alarm on Officer Harper's face. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a simple case of a lost child. Something bigger was at play, and Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that it was far from over. As she stood at the sink, rinsing out the cup, a movement outside caught her attention. She turned toward the window, her heart skipping a beat. A black car, sleek and unmarked, rolled slowly down the street. It wasn't a vehicle she recognized, and in a neighborhood like hers, where everyone knew everyone, that alone was enough to raise suspicion. The car idled near the end of her driveway for a moment before continuing on. Maggie felt a chill run down her spine. Maybe it was nothing, just a coincidence, but given the events of the afternoon, it was hard to dismiss her unease. She closed the curtains and locked the door, trying to steady herself. The officers had promised to update her once they knew more about Ely's mother, but hours passed with no word. The quiet of the house, normally a comfort, now felt suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside set her nerves on edge. She found herself glancing toward the shoebox, still on the porch, as if it were a ticking time bomb. The sound of her landline ringing made her jump. She hurried to answer it, her heart pounding. "Hello." "Maggie, it's Harper," the officer said, her voice clipped but calm. "I wanted to let you know we've located Ely's house." Maggie felt a flicker of relief. "And his mother? Is she okay?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough for Maggie's stomach to tighten. "We found her," Harper said carefully. "She's alive, but she's in bad shape. Paramedics are with her now. It looks like she was attacked." Maggie's hand tightened around the phone. "Attacked? By who?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Harper replied. "But Maggie, there's more to this than we thought. The house, it's been ransacked. Whoever did this wasn't just after Ely's mother. They were looking for something." Maggie's gaze drifted back to the shoebox, her breath catching. "Do you think it's connected to the box?" "It's a strong possibility," Harper admitted. "I'm going to need you to keep that safe for now. And if anyone comes around asking questions, call us immediately." Maggie nodded, even though Harper couldn't see her. "Of course. Is Ely okay?" "He's shaken up, but he's safe," Harper said. "He'll be staying with a social worker for the night while we sort things out." After hanging up, Maddie sat down heavily in her armchair, her mind racing. She thought of Ely's small, tear-streaked face, of his whispered plea not to let the box go. Whatever was inside, it wasn't just a keepsake. It was important. Important enough for someone to tear apart a home and leave a woman gravely injured. Maddie's instincts told her it wasn't just random violence. There was something calculated about it, something purposeful. That night, sleep eluded her. Every sound outside seemed amplified. The distant hum of a car, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. Around midnight, she heard it again. A car engine, this time much closer. Peeking through the curtains, she saw another vehicle, a dark SUV, cruising slowly past her house. Her pulse quickened. She watched as it stopped briefly at the end of her driveway, the glow of its headlights illuminating the front of her home. Then, as if deciding against something, the SUV drove off into the night. The next morning, Maggie was startled by a knock at her door. She hesitated before opening it, peeking through the peephole first. A man stood on her porch, dressed in a suit that was too polished for someone casually visiting a suburban neighborhood. His hair was neatly combed, and he carried a briefcase. Something about him immediately set her on edge. She cracked the door open, her voice guarded. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning, ma'am. My name is Mr. Davis. I'm with the Department of Child Welfare. I was told a young boy named Ely came to your home yesterday." Maggie's grip tightened on the door. He did, but the police have already taken over. If you hear about Eli, you should talk to them. Mr. Davis nodded, his smile unwavering. Of course, I'm just following up on some details. Sometimes things get lost in the shuffle, you know. Would you mind if I came in for a moment to ask you a few questions? Every instinct Maggie had screamed not to let him in. She forced a polite smile. I'm sorry, but now's not a good time. Like I said, you should speak with the police. For a moment, Mr. Davis' expression faltered. His eyes flicked toward the shoebox, still sitting on the porch behind her. That's understandable, he said finally. I'll follow up with them. Have a good day, ma'am. Maggie closed the door and locked it, her hands trembling. She peered through the curtains as Mr. Davis walked back to his car, his polished demeanor unchanged. But when he drove off, she noticed the SUV from the night before parked just down the street. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was Harper. Maggie, I need you to be careful, the officer said. We've received some strange reports in the area. Unmarked vehicles, people asking questions about Eli and his family. Maggie's chest tightened. Someone just came to my door, claiming to be from child welfare. There was a pause. Maggie, no one from child welfare has been sent out, Harper said, her tone sharp. If anyone else shows up, do not open the door. We'll send a patrol car to watch the house. As Maggie hung up, her gaze fell on the shoebox once more. Whatever was inside, it wasn't just important. It was dangerous. And now it seemed she was caught in the middle of something far bigger than she'd ever imagined. The hours dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Maggie kept her doors locked and her phone close by, her every sense heightened. The world outside her house felt like it had closed in on her, suffocatingly still but brimming with unseen threats. The patrol car Officer Harper promised finally appeared, its steady presence parked at the end of her driveway. Yet even with the reassurance of police nearby, Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closing in. Her thoughts kept circling back to Eli, his mother, and the shoebox that seemed to hold the key to this entire nightmare. She resisted the urge to look inside again, not just out of fear but out of a growing sense of dread. Whatever was in there had already upended one family's life and drawn dangerous people to her doorstep. But the longer she sat with it, the more her curiosity gnawed at her. What was so important that it had left a woman injured and a child fleeing for his life? The patrol car's presence provided some comfort at first, but as the evening stretched on, Maggie noticed the officers seemed on edge. One of them, a younger man, got out and walked a slow circle around her property, scanning the street with a flashlight. His partner remained in the car, talking into the radio with a tone Maggie couldn't hear but knew carried urgency. They knew something, or maybe they were feeling it too, that this was no ordinary situation. Around 9 p.m., Maggie's landline rang again. She snatched it up, her nerves fraying further. Hello. Maggie, it's Harper, the familiar voice said, but this time it carried an edge Maggie hadn't heard before. Listen carefully. We got reason to believe someone might try to retrieve that box tonight. Maggie's stomach dropped. What do you mean? I thought the patrol car was here to stop anything like that. They're there as a deterrent, but whoever's behind this, they're persistent, Harper explained. We think they've been monitoring Eli's movements since yesterday. They may know where he went. Maggie's hand tightened on the receiver. What should I do? Stay inside, lock all the doors and windows, and don't open them for anyone unless it's me or my team, Harper said firmly. We're sending backup to the area. Whatever you do, Maggie, don't engage with anyone, and keep that box hidden. Maggie hummed up, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. The tension in the air seemed to thicken with every passing second. She double-checked every lock, pulling the curtains closed tightly and turning off all the lights except a single lamp in the living room. She kept the shoebox with her, placing it on the small table next to her chair. It felt heavier than before, as if its secrets were growing with every moment. Outside, the street was eerily quiet. The patrol car's lights flashed rhythmically, casting long, shifting shadows on her walls. Maggie sat in her chair, her gaze flicking between the shoebox and the window. Time crawled, every sound amplified, the creak of the house settling, the distant hum of a car engine, the faint rustle of wind in the trees. Then, just past midnight, she saw it. Movement. A dark figure stepping between the trees across the street, darting from shadow to shadow. Her breath caught, and she leaned closer to the window, careful to stay out of sight. The figure moved with purpose, staying low and avoiding the glow of the patrol car's lights. Maggie's heart raced. Whoever they were, they didn't belong here. The younger officer outside must have seen it too. His flashlight snapped on, cutting through the darkness as he called out sharply, "Hey, stop right there." The figure froze for a split second before bolting, disappearing into the trees. The officer gave chase, his flashlight bobbing as he ran. Maggie's pulse hammered in her ears as she watched the other officer step out of the car, his hand on his holstered weapon, scanning the area with tense precision. Suddenly, there was a crash, a sound so sharp and close it made Maggie jump out of her chair. It had come from the back of the house. Someone was inside. Her first instinct was to run, but she forced herself to stay quiet, grabbing her phone and dialing 911 with trembling fingers. "This is Maggie Thompson," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "Someone's in my house." The operator's calm voice tried to reassure her. "Stay on the line, ma'am. Officers are already in the area. Lock yourself in a room if you can, and don't engage." Maggie nodded even though the operator couldn't see her. Clutching the phone in one hand and the shoebox in the other, she crept toward her bedroom, her steps as light as she could make them. The house was deathly silent now, the kind of silence that felt alive, coiled, and waiting to strike. She reached the bedroom door and slipped inside, locking it behind her. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she listened. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the house. Whoever it was wasn't in a hurry. They were searching, confident they had time. Maggie pressed herself against the door, every muscle in her body taut. The footsteps grew louder, heading toward the hallway outside her room. She held her breath, her fingers clutching the shoebox so tightly her knuckles ached. A shadow passed under the door, and for a moment she thought her heart might stop altogether. The knob rattled. Maggie's stomach plummeted as she realized the intruder was trying the door. It held, but the sound of the locked handle only seemed to embolden them. A sharp thud followed as the door shuddered in its frame. They were trying to break it down. "Maggie, we're almost there." Harper's voice came faintly from her phone, though it felt like it was miles away. "Stay where you are." But the pounding on the door grew louder, more insistent. Maggie knew it was only a matter of time before it gave way. She clutched the shoebox tighter, her mind racing. This wasn't just about protecting herself anymore. She had to protect whatever was inside that box, whatever was so important that people were willing to risk everything to get it. The door splintered, the sound of wood cracking echoing through the room. Maggie backed away, her hands trembling as she stared at the jagged gap that had formed. A face appeared, shadowed and cold, its eyes locking onto hers. The intruder stepped forward, slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. And then, outside, the sound of sirens shattered the night. For the first time in what felt like hours, Maggie felt a flicker of hope. Help was here, but would it come in time? The sirens wailed closer, their sound sharp and urgent, but the intruder didn't flinch. Instead, they stepped fully into the room, their silhouette blocking the faint light from the hallway. Maggie's breath hitched as she backed toward the corner of the room, clutching the shoebox to her chest like a lifeline. She could now make out more details. A man, tall and lean, his face partially obscured by a hood. His eyes, cold and focused, locked onto her with chilling precision. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," he said, his voice low and steady. It carried no malice, only certainty, which made it all the more unnerving. Maggie shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man took a step closer, his movements deliberate, almost casual. "You know exactly what I mean. The box. Hand it over and no one else gets hurt." Outside, the sound of car doors slamming and hurried footsteps reached her ears. The police were here, but they hadn't entered the house yet. Time stretched unbearably thin, every second feeling like an hour. Maggie's mind raced. She couldn't let them have the box. Whatever was inside had cost Ely's family too much already. And something about the man's calm demeanor made her certain that giving it up wouldn't end this nightmare. It would only make it worse. "I already called the police," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "They're here now. If you leave, maybe they won't catch you." The man's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. "You don't understand, do you?" he said, almost pitying. "This isn't about the police. They can't stop what's coming." Before Maggie could respond, the pounding of boots echoed through the house. "Police, show yourself." A voice called, loud and commanding. The man's expression didn't change, but Maggie saw his hand twitch toward his pocket. She realized too late what he was doing. "Wait," she started, but the man was already moving. He pulled something small and metallic from his pocket, a device with blinking lights, and hurled it toward the door. The flashbang detonated with a deafening bang, the light so blinding Maggie had to shield her eyes. The walls seemed to shake with the force of it, and her ears rang with a high-pitched whine. She dropped to the floor, clutching the shoebox even tighter, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through her disoriented senses, she heard shouting, panicked, urgent voices from the officers outside. When her vision cleared enough to focus, the man was gone. The door to the bedroom hung open, swaying slightly as if mocking her. She struggled to her feet, her legs shaking beneath her. The shoebox was still in her hands, but the sense of safety she felt moments ago was gone, replaced by a gnawing fear that the worst was yet to come. "Maggie!" A familiar voice shouted from the hallway. Officer Harper appeared a second later, her face pale but determined. "Are you okay?" Maggie nodded, though her voice failed her. Harper moved quickly, checking her over for injuries. "What happened? Did he hurt you?" "No," Maggie managed to croak. He wanted the box. He said the police couldn't stop what was coming." Harper's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing. "Did he take it?" Maggie shook her head, holding the shoebox out as if to prove it. Harper exhaled in relief, but only for a moment. Her radio crackled to life, a frantic voice coming through. "Suspect has fled the scene, heading east, requesting backup." Harper's attention snapped back to Maggie. "We need to get you out of here. This isn't just a break-in anymore. Whoever these people are, they're well organized and dangerous." As Harper guided Maggie toward the front door, Maggie's thoughts churned. The man's words echoed in her mind. They can't stop what's coming. What did he mean? And why was the shoebox so critical to their plans? She wanted to demand answers, to know what was really going on, but she could see from Harper's tense expression that the officer didn't have them either. The front yard was a flurry of activity. Officers moved in every direction, their flashlights cutting through the dark as they searched for the intruder. The patrol car's lights cast harsh, spinning shadows across the scene. Harper led Maggie toward one of the cruisers parked near the curb, but before they could reach it, another officer called out, "Harper, we got a problem." Harper turned, her grip on Maggie's arm tightening. "What is it?" The officer hesitated, his face grim. "We just got word from dispatch. The ambulance transporting Ely's mother never made it to the hospital. It's gone off the grid." Maggie's heart plummeted. "What do you mean, gone off the grid?" The officer shook his head. "They're not responding to radio calls, and GPS tracking was disabled about 15 minutes ago."